Hey everyone. As an update, my voice has went back to normal now finally, so I'm back to my normal narration starting next video.
This happened when my dad was 16, all the way back in 1976. Him and my uncle Nigel were very outgoing and liked to explore to keep themselves occupied. When the summer of '76 came around, my dad finished school. He wanted to do one big bit of adventuring before he began work. The Pennine Way. For those who do not know, the Pennine Way is a 270-mile walkway in Britain that, depending on which way you walk, starts in just south of Scotland and basically cuts through the middle of England and finishes in the Midlands. It usually takes around a 3 to 4 week walk. With a long summer to fill, my dad and 15-year-old Uncle Nigel and my dad's friend Russ were dropped off in Scotland by my great-grandfather to begin their hike. The first week went swimmingly. They met some nice locals who even cooked them food and gave them room to sleep in, and generally enjoyed this whole new level of freedom entrusted upon them. They mainly camped in clear areas, but one day, they decided to cover an extra 5 miles in order to reach a village as they needed to buy some more food and get spare tents. They stumbled into a village around 6 p.m. and saw the local pub was opening. After relaxing in the pub with some drinks, my dad tells me that the owner probably knew they were underage, but wanted all the business they could get. The owner offered to let the guys camp out in the back field of their pub. The landlady/wife said the owner seemed oddly hesitant at first, looking a bit concerned and having a bit of a word with her husband in private. However, Yorkshire hospitality seemed to override any doubt she had after a night of heavy drinking with the locals. They resided to their tent. My dad says they were using an oil lantern hooked to a center of the tent as a light source, and when they turned it off, they left it hanging, which is important, not only for what happened next, but also what happened the next day. My dad woke up and turned off the oil light while debating to get up and having a piss in the field, seeming as the owners had been nice in letting them camp out there, when he heard a door creak open from the creak shut. There were no footsteps, so my dad had to put it down to an old shed or something. After a few seconds, however, the sound of feet landing on grass became progressively audible until they stopped right outside the tent. My dad thought it was the owner checking in on us, and he went to unzip the tent. The owner fully unzipped it. My dad said the weird thing about this was that he didn't have a shirt on, just some slippers and night trousers. After my dad asked what was doing, he stuttered out some excuse about hearing a growl and went to check if the boys were okay and safe. There was no growl, as the only sound in the last 5 minutes was the door, the footsteps, and the unzipping of the tent. The guy weirdly emphasized the need for a good sleep before hiking and intrusively tapped on the oil light, asking for it to be turned off. He walked off, letting off a frustrated sigh and nearing the house and closed the door behind him. Morning comes and the owner's wife makes the boys some breakfast while they pack up their stuff. The owner takes down the tent for them and takes off somewhere in his 4x4 without coming back to the house. They thank the woman and tell her husband thank you as well. She says that when she figures out when he comes back, that he will tell him. They come to their designated camping spot, just next to a small stream, around an hour and a half early, and decide to have a longer rest after walking around 130 to 140 miles over the past 8 to 9 days. They pull out the tent and find lots of small holes, all about a pen's width and wide. What's weird about this is my dad described the size of it as holding a pen while telling me this. Everyone looks confused, and my dad rationalizes this by the man telling him about an animal last night. It must have come back and nibbled on the tent, as that explains it, sure. Russ suggests they walk back to a different village around 2 miles back and try to get another tent. They leave the now useless tent as a marker for their site and walk back to the village. With their luck, a shop clearly targeting walkers is open. Unfortunately, they didn't have any tents, but they decide to buy tape and cover the holes for tonight and hope to find a new tent somewhere soon. When walking back, the sun had begun to set and it was quite dark. Moonlight mainly guiding them back down the path. When they returned to their site, they couldn't believe it. Their tent was set up for them, but it was on fire. completely engulfed in flames. They threw the water in their bottles over the tent and used the stream water to fill them and eventually doused the fire. When they looked inside the tent, their oil lamp glass had been smashed and someone had followed them, set up their tent, and waited for them to return before smashing the oil lamp and, in turn, lighting up the tent in flames. My dad told me that there really isn't an explanation except for the pub owner. He was stopping doing whatever he was planning on doing with my dad being awake and decided to take some fucked up form of revenge by sending a message. At first, I totally didn't believe my dad and thought he was trying to scare me, but upon referencing the burning tent incident in a phone to my Uncle Nigel, he instantly started rambling about how weird it was. My Uncle Nigel does not lie. A little background on the events I'm about to write about. This all happened in mid-October. My family owns about 160 acres of land in the middle of nowhere. Closest neighbor is a friend who let us rent the pasture for his cattle when he needs to. Some friends and I decided we wanted to build a little cabin out there, and that we would hang out at it. So, one weekend, one of my friends and I loaded up a tractor we were renting from his dad and headed up out there. It was just me and him that weekend, as everyone else was busy. We got there a little late, since it took a while to get everything loaded and packed for the weekend. He sat about setting up the tent and I made our fire. As I did so, I made an odd discovery. There was a phone book from a few towns over, still in its plastic sleeve, right next to our fire pit. I picked it up and showed my friend. We both enjoyed scaring ourselves, and I made the comment that we aren't alone out here, and we both laughed at it. Later that night, we were setting up around the campfire, talking and BSing. There was a big bright moon that night, and a bit of breeze which made the whatever leaves were left rustle. It was a little creepy, but we enjoyed the atmosphere. We noticed, however, someone crossing through the middle of the field, their body just visible from the moonlight. At first, it was a little odd. My friend and I discussed for a few seconds if we should confront him, but I made the suggestion that he was probably just taking a shortcut across the field. Although I didn't really like it, it wasn't a huge deal. If we caught him doing it again, then we would confront him, we decided. The rest of the night passed pretty uneventfully. We eventually got in our tent and laid down. We were probably 20 or so feet from the fire pit, which was by that point burning quite low. We talked for a few minutes, and then we go silent, trying to fall asleep. As we're laying there, we hear something. It sounded like quiet footsteps walking around the fire pit. We both look at each other, silent. Then we hear a piece of wood getting thrown into the fire, and it flamed up quite a bit. I grabbed the shotgun I always kept in the tent and quickly racked it. We then heard someone run away, but by the time we got out they were too far. The rest of the weekend was pretty quiet, and the events of the first night seemed kind of dreamy to us. We just cleared the area for the cabin and cut the stacked trees and cut them for the firewood. Next weekend, we get out there. My uncle was out there as well, and we went to check his game cams. This is where it got much more worrying for us. My uncle told us he was pissed because someone had stolen the batteries and SD cards out of the cameras. We told him about what happened the weekend before, and then parted ways. When we got out there, we noticed that quite a bit of our wood had been cut and stacked, and it was already gone. And we were the last people to camp out there, which means someone had come out of there and taken ourselves. When we went and checked the tractor, which we had left down there, we found it broken into, and the chainsaw which we had left had been stolen. To make a long story short, nothing else so far has happened. I was hesitant for a few weeks to continue with the cabin, since we weren't there all the time. I was worried if it would be an incentive for whoever was there to stay. I'm not sure if it was transient or local or who. If for some reason anything else happens, I'll definitely update. I live in a very small town of about 100 people in rural New South Wales, Australia. This happened when my friends and I were 14. My town used to be a very close-knit farming community, but the shift to modern times and the massive drought of the 2000s led most of the businesses to be closed and farmers to move away. The aging population slowly died and their houses were filled with despicable types. Drug dealers and addicts, thieves and dole bludgers. It's sad really, even now, there are still great people here. What I've always found creepy is even though a very small population, and I've known just about everybody since before I can remember, there have always been people in the surrounding area that no one seems to know. Older loners mostly, who keep to themselves and no one ever sees them. On top of that, there have been several pedophile charges led against some of them, and there have been numerous break-ins and attempts to break-ins in our home. Not to mention that for the long stretches of time we've been out without police officers, which means a 000 call would take an hour for any help to arrive. It gets even creepier the further out the bush you go. I've heard of abandoned farmsteads where families have just disappeared, with all their belongings, including cars, left behind. There was even a multi-generational inbred family reminiscent of the Hills Have Eyes discovered a few years ago, though that's a few hundred miles from me. Anyway, I grew up and went to primary school here, but we had to travel an hour to go to high school. It took quite a while for my closest childhood friend, Tim, and I to make new friends. After 2 years of high school, we invited 3 of our friends to come out of town to come hiking and camping. Tim's parents owned a small property where they kept sheepdogs and horses a few miles from the town. We camped for 5 days there in the school holidays. The first night was what you would expect. We sat around the campfire telling stories. I told a story of some of those creepy loners I mentioned earlier, a pair of brothers that lived a few miles up the road that were camping. They were rarely seen, with a reputation of being very creepy hillbilly hicks. I told them the story of how one night they had tried to cripple my father over him supposedly stealing their business. They ambushed him at the local weighbridge at night. My father managed to fight both of them off. My cousin had also ran into them taking a shortcut across their field, only to hear gunfire in his direction. My cousin has lied to me before, so I didn't really know if he was being honest. But I made it out like it was later embellished, that their reputation with the normal inbred cannibal type crap city folk expect. On the second night, we decided to go for a night walk. We were kids and enjoyed fantasy movies and games and had a bit of role-playing fun. One of us, though, was too scared to go into the dark, so on our walk we decided to play a prank on him. We started screaming and running back to the camp scattered, saying, "He got Henry!" It worked and we caused our friend to get scared. Zeb, who our friend was, tried to climb an electric fence to escape. I had to come back dirty and bloody and we hid from the farmhouse until Tim ruined the prank by claiming he heard the brothers skin people, which caused us to burst out laughing. The next afternoon, we hiked up the nearest hill, called Sims Gap Hill. It was a popular walk for Tim and I when we were kids. The fastest way to get to the hill was by taking the dirt road called the Stock Route, which ran parallel to the main tar road which led down to town. The two roads are connected by another called Sawmill Road, which was at the base of the hill. Anyway, we walked down the Stock Route and I pointed out the Hillbilly Brothers property as we went past it. All you could see from the road are piles of rusted old cars. We reached Sawmill Road and walked across the paddock to the hill and had an enjoyable time. We started climbing down the hill as it got late, but underestimated the time it took to walk across the paddock to the road. By the time we reached the road, it was night, and of course it happened to be pitch black. As we started down Sawmill Road to the Stock Route, a pair of massive bright headlights turned into the road from behind us. Naturally, we got off the road, which meant disappearing into the thick patch of trees between the roads and the brothers' property. As the lights caught up to us, the vehicle started slowing. Up until then, we had thought it was a farmer's ute, but now we realized it was a very old, a very loud tractor. Not wanting to be questioned by any meddling adult, I encouraged the guys to hide. The tractor slowed right down and flashed a spotlight into the trees, and then sped away. The guys asked me who it was, and I said I didn't know. We continued walking slowly until we saw the tractor turn down the Stock Route and then into the brothers' property. Now, I was unnerved. The tractor came roaring down the fence line, and I yelled at my friends to run. We ran until we came into the small well-hidden ditch, which we jumped in and laid very still. The tractor stopped right on us and shined the spotlight over the trees. It didn't illuminate the ditch. Luckily, the driver stopped the tractor and got off, walking over to the fence. I peered up and saw the silhouette of a dirty, disheveled man with messy hair standing at the fence line, looking around, with his rifle in his hand. In a nasally, Aussie hillbilly voice, he yelled out, "Where are you, cunts?" We didn't dare move. I started thinking what we'd have to do if he climbed the fence and started coming our way, but he eventually turned around and got back on his tractor. I started with a groan and it rumbled down all the way. I got my friends up and we sprinted towards the stock route, ducking under branches and jumping over fallen trees. We hadn't quite reached it when the headlights were behind us again, roaring up Sawmill Road. We made it to the road and panicked. It was still 2 or 3 miles back to the camp, and we wouldn't be able to outrun the tractor. On the other side of the stock route was a state forest with tens of miles of twisting dirt roads and motorbike trails and goat tracks. Despite how dark it was with the strong possibility of getting lost, we dove in there. We hid as he went past us again, finding a forest road which led back to the general direction of the town. We followed it for a while, wondering if he had given up and if it was safe to go back on the stock route. Then he was in front of us, blinding headlights roaring down the forest road. We jumped back into the trees and decided to run. We ran straight past him, behind us and turned back onto the stock route and chased us again. He circled us 4 times, with us hiding then running, hiding then running. When we had gotten far enough that we thought we were close enough to camp, we ran through the woods and jumped back on the stock route, to be met by headlights. Tim's mother had come looking for us, finding our camp empty. She had finally found us and we were still a mile or so from the camp. We quickly piled in and she drove us back. We told her what happened, but she and my parents just said they're weird people and to stay away from them in the future. November last year, me and my friend decided to drive up a car to Scotland to do some fishing and eventually make our way to Edinburgh. After the first day of catching some salmon and brown trout, we stored our catchers in the cooler box. After contemplating whether to sleep in the car tonight, as we had left quite late to set up camp, at around 4:30ish and the sun was going down, eventually I said, let's set up a fire and cook the fish. I didn't drive all the way to Scotland to sleep in the car. My friend agreed as we set off looking for a spot to camp. We found a little wooded area next to a car park near a farm. We looked into it prior and apparently you can basically camp anywhere in Scotland as long as you left the place as you found it. So we grabbed all of our shit out of the car and started setting up our campsite. 20 minutes later we had a fire going, 2 fold-up chairs and 2 tents up. My tent was out of view from my friend. This will be relevant later. We were glad we chose to camp outside instead of sleeping in the car, as we smoked a few joints and we reminisced about school, life, and etc. My friend struggled to keep his eyes open as I checked my phone. 2 a.m. he called it, a night crawling into his tent and zipping it shut. I sat there with my feet up on my friend's now empty chair, listening to sounds of the wildlife. I shut off the torch and had hung up on the tree next to us, leaving it in the darkness, apart from the burning embers from the coal. It must have been 3 or so minutes before I started to hear the crunching of leaves and snapping of twigs that seemed to be coming toward me. Being a quite rational person, I passed it off as a fox drawn to the scraps of food we might have laying around. I was quickly proven wrong when I heard a sniffle, like someone with a cold clearing their nose. My high quickly turned from chilled out to paranoia as I feel a heavy dread come over me. My mind raced. Why the fuck would someone be here in the woods at 2 to 3 a.m.? Why are they coming towards me? I slowly reached down in the pocket and felt my heart drop as I didn't feel the smooth blade of my pocket knife. Shit, I must have left it in the tent. All the while I hear the treading coming closer and closer and my heartbeat racing. Out of the darkness I see a middle-aged man, clean-shaven, parted hair, around 5'10", slowly creeping toward me, almost on all fours like a predator, trying to stay out of sight. I sat there paralyzed, unable to speak. My mouth was so dry that I could hardly swallow. That's when I realized he hadn't even seen me. Being under the tree with no light source, I must have blended in. Also, with there only being one tent in view, I guess he thought my friend was the only one camping here. He got closer to the tent and half breathed and half whispered, "Come on, do it," in a raspy voice. Creeped the fuck out and unable to bear the thought of what he might do next. "Oi, can I help you?" He jumped up in shock and his whole demeanor changed. He looked at me mumbling awkward as he scurried back out of the woods. I sat there, still trying to comprehend what had just happened and what I saw. Then I saw headlights of a car turn on and drive away. I woke my friend up, and he could not tell what had happened, but he could see how shook up I was. Without full explanation from me, he willingly grabbed all our gear and we slept in the car that night with the doors locked. So let me start off with a little bit of background info. I'm a 14-year-old Canadian male, and this happened around a year ago. This story is nothing but the truth. Me and my grandparents are extremely close and have been all my life. So my grandfather is an outdoorsy, get-off-your-phone kind of guy, and he pitched the idea to go camping in early August. I was kind of excited because I don't get outside as often as I should, and I figured it would be some quality time with him. That being said, we weren't going true camping. He wanted to go into the woods, but I told him about a nearby campground that we could go to instead. He was still thrilled, so we embarked on our weekend journey. Let me paint you a picture. Our campsite was a dead end, aside from the one next to ours. It was right near the lake. It was beautiful, but to our dismay, we had people right next to us. We did all the camping things, made a fire, swimming, and even the infamous spooky stories around the campfire. We hit the sack at around 10 p.m. because there was not much else to do. As soon as my head hit the pillow, it started. The crunching of leaves on our campsite. We thought nothing of it at the time because the night was still young. Some assholes were setting off fireworks and others were having a raging party. Hell, even our neighbors were still laughing. I fell asleep for a while. 11 p.m. is when it started to get weird. The party was still on, but our neighbors shut up, so the crunching of leaves didn't make sense. It was consistent, so my guess is that the noise was footsteps. No one needed to be on our campsite, so falling asleep was a slightly bigger challenge. My grandpa seemed to be having an even harder time as he seemed to be on alert mode. Yes, I know we are both paranoid, but I feel like the paranoia keeps us safe. I wake up and check my watch and it's 12 a.m. It's starting to rain and the water is splashing against the rocks and the thunder in the distance is quiet enough to sleep to. Even over the sound of rain pattering against the tarp, I still hear the fucking footsteps. The unsettling nature of the situation starts to eat away at me. I wasn't scared, just creeped out. Sleep overcame me, but it didn't come easy. My grandfather finally slept too. A crack of thunder woke me up. Full-blown thunderstorm now. I felt relieved as I thought the footsteps stopped. But I heard the thump of wood. I don't know what the person did, but I heard 2 very loud knocks, followed by 2 large splashes. Fuck this, was my only thought as the footsteps continued around our campsite. I stayed awake until like 5 a.m. Daybreak was near, but my heart nearly exploded when I heard someone fumbling with our tent zipper in the fabric. I see the outline of 3 fingers being dragged across the tent. My body shut down as my blood just seemed to chill. The hand trailed away and became quieter as they left our campsite. I woke my grandfather up as soon as the sun came up. Before we left, I went to investigate our site. Lots of the ground was turned into mud in the storm, so the mass of the boot prints were very unnoticeable. But you could see many footsteps. Easy to say we dipped the fuck out after that, and that was it.
As soon as I was sure my laptop was dead, I ran to school and frantically tried to locate the quickest, most economical replacement so I would be able to continue to meet my med school's IT requirement and resume my studies. I located a Walmart about 35 minutes away in the distant burbs of the city I just made my home, where I could find a brand name laptop for $250 that I could pick up the same evening. Fearing for my academic future, I forked over the dough and just jumped in my car. The 10-mile drive from the highway was all used car lots, thrift stores and double wides. I arrived at my destination with a fairly nuanced opinion on why this pickup location had met my price criteria. I came in the front door of the Walmart in my usual kit, black jeans, tank top, shades. Several different women, who all called me baby, directed me to the electronics counter, where another woman informed baby that baby's laptop order could not be filled as a consequence of demand. I took off my shades. I hadn't come this far to leave empty-handed. "I'd like to look at the laptops you have in stock," I told the lady. She waved her hand and up stepped the guy. I think the reason I let him stand so close to me was the fact that his arms were half as long as the average person's arms, and it momentarily shifted my perspective. We walked over to the laptop aisle, so close that I kinda kept tripping over him. Then he turned and looked at me straight in the eyes, like a fortune teller or a seer, and pronounced, "Your pupils are really huge." "I take medication that makes my pupils really huge for ADHD. I replied, "I know, they're always like that. They're really big. Are you not used to being outside during the day?" I didn't know what to do with that one. I just figured it was foul ball. I don't follow it. "I used to be law enforcement," the guy says, smiling widely. "What do you do?" Was that supposed to make you feel better? I was trying to imagine him handcuffing someone with those tiny arms. It seemed difficult. "I'm a med student." He nodded and said something about laptops. I also said things about laptops. "So you're old enough to drink?" he asked me. I could smell his breath. Generally, dead things smell better. "Yes." "How old are you?" 26. "Do you like horses or motorcycles?" "I don't actually like either of those things." "I used to do both of those things," he said. "Do you have a boyfriend?" He's leaning closer now. I'm so close to the laptop. I need that laptop. "Yeah, I've been with a guy for 5 years." "Well, congratulations. Is it like we're at a bloody bar mitzvah or something?" He leans into the laptop cage and pulls out my desired laptop. "You're a real stand-up gal for not dumping him, you know. I was with a girl for a long time. We lived together and everything, but it didn't work out." "Oh," I said, reaching for the laptop. He smiles and I realise A, his pupils are the same size as mine, and B, he has horrible teeth. "Long story short, she went to prison," he said. "Oh wow." I clutched the laptop box to my chest as a shield. "I'm sorry for that." "Are you sure you're old enough to drink?" he asks. This is the awkward moment. I tried to make conversation. "So, what's the difference between Walmart and a super Walmart?" "Well, they're basically the same thing, except we sell drugs." He moves his eyebrows. At this point, I broke his unnerving stare and hightailed it to the cash wrap, where the woman who called me baby were waiting to serve me. As I check out, the guy just hung over my shoulder and informed me that he had a pet snapping turtle. "You've got to see her, she's beautiful." "Don't they snap?" I had to try and involve the cash wrap lady in the situation. I looked at her. "Oh, they snap, baby," she said. "His turtle's beautiful. She's a precious thing." "She just acts like a little kitty cat," the guy assured me. "She's brown and yellow and real big. You sure you don't want to come and see her? She's in my truck." "Thanks, but I've got to go," I exclaimed, before running to the front of the store. "Hey, good luck in nursing school," he shouted after me. Let's not meet again.
I live in a very populated city, and in approximately a 5-mile radius of my home, there's at least 3 major grocery stores, one of which is a Walmart. Being a 16-year-old girl, I visit Walmart on a regular basis if I need notebooks or something for school, or if I want to browse makeup and that kind of stuff. I've never been uncomfortable going shopping by myself. Actually, I enjoy it. I've never had any bad experiences being on my own, until a couple of months back. On this particular Sunday, my parents were working and my little brother's at a baseball game, so I'd been home alone all day. I needed body wash and a new lanyard for school. Anyway, mine broke the Friday before, so that's my main reason for going out. I go to Walmart and parked, like I have 100 times before. I went in and went straight to the purse section. That's where all the lanyards are. I walked down the aisle and I saw there's a man looking at wallets hanging on display. I didn't think much of him. He was probably in his mid-50s, average height and weight, wearing jeans and a brown t-shirt. He looked just like an old grandpa. "Hi there," he said with a big grin. "Hi," I said back with a grin. "How are you today?" he said. "I'm good. How are you?" I was still browsing the lanyards that I liked. "Great, I'm just doing some shopping today," and another big smile. I thought it was weird that he explained that he was shopping, since I could see that he was clearly looking at the wallets on the rack in the direction I pointed him. What else would he be doing there? I decided it as nothing and kept on my way. I eventually found what I needed and made my way over to the body wash. I was in no rush to be anywhere, so I was taking a leisurely walk up and down the aisle, smiling, and just trying to see anything that was interesting. He walked by the aisle and smiled again. At this point, I'm a little uneasy. I've always been taught to trust my gut instinct, and something just didn't feel right to me. I've never had a conversation with anybody in Walmart before, and this guy's clearly following me. I then texted a friend to let her know what was going on. I thought this was a precautionary measure. I decided that maybe it's a coincidence. I mean, he could have needed soap, and continued on my way shopping. I went a few aisles up to the face wash, and that's when I ran into him for the third time. "Excuse me, can I tell you something?" he said. "You've got a beautiful smile. You're beautiful. You know that." I said, "Oh, thanks," in an uncomfortable manner. I didn't like this situation. He then said, "Are you married?" Now mind you, I was only 16 at the time and definitely didn't look old enough to be married. "No," I said. "Ah, me neither," he said with a grin. The way that he said this made my blood run cold. I don't know what you mean," I stammered as I forced a smile across my face. I was really worried now. He began to speak again when a man who's probably 19 or 20, standing in the aisle perpendicular to us looking at cologne, walked over and said, "Yeah, she's with me." He then gave the man the biggest smile that he could and stood super close to me. I said, "Oh, I'm glad you showed up." The weird man then said, "Oh, I figured," and he seemed very uncomfortable. "Good luck, you two," and he walked away. I turned towards the man and thanked him for coming over to help me. He said that he could tell by the tone of my voice I was very worried. He watched me check out to make sure the guy didn't follow me. This was the last I ever saw of the two of them. I have no idea what the old man's intentions were, but sometimes you just know in your gut that something's wrong. And that day I knew something about him was terrifying and sinister.
So, I've been creeping for the last few days, thoroughly scared shitless, and realised I had my own weirdo story. I'm not going to speculate on what might have happened though, because he could just have been incredibly awkward. This is 14 years ago. I was 19 and just moved into my first real house, not a dorm, with roommates that I picked. We decided to head to Walmart to pick up some house things and whatnot. 6 of us go. It is myself plus 4 female roommates and 1 roommate's boyfriend. We'll call him Daniel. We head to Walmart in my 89 Bronco, the most badass vehicle ever, I just have to say. We get there and start shopping in a perfectly normal fashion. I mean, we're being loud and obnoxious young adults, but that shit's normal. Now, for this story's sake, I need to let you know that I'm a talker. I talk to everyone. I compliment strangers, say hello if we make eye contact while walking, that sort of thing. I will not say that I do not know a stranger, because I'm terribly shy when I'm alone. But when in a group, I'm very outgoing and friendly. And that was my mistake this evening. We're 2 hours in, and we pass this dude. Probably our age, but one can never tell. As I glance up, we make eye contact, so I feel obliged to say, "Hiya." And we all go about our merry way. Only he went about our merry way. We're all in the store for a solid 45 minutes, haven't gotten halfway through, and he crosses our path again. He walks up to me with his head down, like with his chin on his chest, takes out his hand and says, "Here," and then rushes away. It's his phone number. Oh man, that's super sweet. I feel bad having no intention of calling him, but it was a super sweet gesture, or so I thought. It has now been the better part of 2 hours, going down every aisle, discussing as adults what we do and don't need. We thought we were so grown. Let's discuss whether these trash bags are cost efficient before buying them, in a group, all huddled up like adults do. And we cross his path again. He stops in the middle of the aisle and just stares us up and down while we pass. I'm a little weirded out, and so is Daniel, the roomie's boyfriend. He grabs my hand and starts acting like he's my boyfriend. The guy proceeds to follow us throughout the remainder of our journey. We get to the checkout. There are 5 girls, each with a full cart. Poor cashier, I know she was just done. and we see him 4 lanes away checking out with a soda. Daniel was getting uneasy and pissed off, so he grabs my waist and loudly shouts, "Let's go, babe," or some silly shit like that, and we all walk out. He walks out with us. We get to my car and begin loading things, and this guy goes to his car and just sits there staring at us. Daniel is now standing near the back of the car with a rubber mallet, just smacking it into his hand like he's a fucking mobster or something, thinking this will make the guy leave. It didn't. We finish loading and pile in to head out. I turn my vehicle on, and the dude starts his vehicle as well. We pull out and head home normally until Daniel, who has been watching these headlights like a fucking hawk, says, "Don't go home, drive to the police station or a firehouse or something. That guy's been behind us since we left the Walmart." All 5 of the 19-year-old girls he's in the car with start freaking the fuck out. This dude stays with us until we turn into a fire station. He kept going. We sat in the parking lot for a good 20 or 30 minutes, looking to see if he drives back by. He doesn't, and we head home. This event is why I haven't been into a Walmart in 14 years. I still talk to random strangers though, I can't help it, I really like people, but I don't want to see the creepy Walmart guy again.
When I was 10, my father, older sister and I went to Walmart. My sister and I liked to wander alone in the store, so my father had invested in 3 walkie-talkies. I was by myself, walking through the bedding section. I was getting a new bedsheet. I was looking intensely at one of them when I felt like I was being watched. I looked over to the beginning of the aisle and a large man in overalls and dirty brown hair was just staring at me. I decided it'd be best just to walk away and go to the pet section. I was asking my father through the walkie-talkie where he was. He didn't answer. I made it to the dog food and was happily next to another shopper. He walked by the aisle. Thinking that he didn't see me, I let out a sigh of relief. I asked my father again where he was, and again, no answer. I felt like things were getting safe when I turned around and there was this guy at the end of the aisle. He was just staring at me standing there. I quickly walked away with the plan to head to customer service desk and ask them to call my father. As I walked parallel to me, this guy was matching my steps. He was keeping me from reaching the front of the store. I changed directions, trying to lose him. In my 10-year-old mind, I thought running to the bathroom was a good idea and safe. I ran in and hid inside a stall. I heard his footsteps as he entered and saw his shoes below the stall's door. Then I heard an angry woman's voice say, "Get out of here now." The woman knocked on the stall's door and said, "Are you okay?" I opened it and hugged her and started crying. I told her everything that happened and she walked with me, holding my hand to the customer service desk. She waited until she saw my father. I told him what happened. Despite saying exactly what happened with the lady verifying it, he never believed me.
Hi Redditors, I've been reading some of the encounters on Let's Not Meet for some time, and I figured I'd share an experience I had a few weeks ago. It's not gut-wrenching as some of the stories on here, but it's given me the creeps nevertheless. This was late August, early September I believe, and my dad and I went to the Walmart closest to NIU to pick up a few things. Take note of this, ladies. My dad and I ended up going separate ways, and I wanted to take a look at the fish section. Considering it's Walmart we're talking about, many of the fish in the tanks were dead and stuck to the filters if they hadn't already been picked up clean by the other surviving fish. This distressed me and I ended up making a pity purchase of a surviving Calco fantail, who now, go figure, has a swim bladder issue. But I digress. I called an employee over to assist me with the fish, and she said she'd call someone over from the fish department to help. 5 minutes later, a very large black guy comes walking over. I greet him politely. He looks me up and down. I should know I'd just got done working out for the day, so I was still in workout apparel, so tight stuff that wouldn't get in the way. I'm also very awkwardly curvy. Anyway, he looked me up and down and says, "You go school round here?" I respond, "No, I only just got out of high school." "Damn, you should come round here more often. You're looking damn good, and I could show you a good time." "Yeah, okay, no thanks. Please just get my fish." So I walk away fish in hand, and I start looking for my dad. Of course he's scarce, just like he has been my whole life, so I kinda just wander until I find him. That's when I see the creep from the fish section again. He's with another employee, a guy, and I pretend I don't see them, until I see them looking at me. I double take, and the creep's friend waves at me. I kind of just sheepishly nod, and continue looking for my dad. Not even 3 minutes later, I'm making my way towards the men's section, that I see them again, and start to wonder if they're following me. At this point, I'm severely creeped out, and decide to head for the checkout, just so I can get out of there. As the cashier was checking out my fish, and fish accessories, I bring up to him the conditions of the tanks. He radios the manager to take a look, and when the manager leaves, I bring up to him that I think I was being followed. He explains to me that it wasn't the first time he'd heard that, and that the creep was actually a few lanes over, still with his friend. He said, "I'll make sure you're not followed, don't worry about it." As I was leaving the store, I didn't get more than 15 feet away from the register before I heard a loud, "Hey!" Not like, "Hey man, how are you?" but more the kind of, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" kind of hey. I turn and see the creep and his friend quickly retreating back to wherever they came from. Sure enough, they had been trying to follow me out the store into the dark parking lot. I thanked the cashier immensely and left. When I get to the truck, sure enough, my dad was sitting here checking his emails. Of course, I was steamed. I tell him what happened, and he brushes it off. He says, "You're a pretty girl, you'll be hit on your whole life. Don't worry about it this one time. Thanks, Dad."
So this took place only a few months ago, sometime in early July. I want to say, so my friend was over and had to make a run to Walmart. It's about 9, not exactly late, but a time that my mother normally wouldn't let me out, but given that I was graduated, me being 19 and my friend being 20, my mum let us go. Our plan was to go and grab some trash bags, something that would normally take about 5 minutes tops. It ended up taking half an hour. So we got in, got the garbage bags and walked around for a bit. We just kind of fooled around, browsing and talking, whatever. Now during this time, I noticed that my friend was acting kind of weird, but I brushed it off. As we're standing there in line, ready to check out, my friend leaned in and said, "Do you see that guy?" I glanced up, but didn't know what she was talking about. I still feel really guilty about this, for being too dumb to even notice. We started walking away after checking out, buying only garbage bags. It doesn't take much time. She explained as we're going off that she saw a guy who said hello and she said hi back, but something about him was really off. She saw him again at the checkout and got that weird feeling, but we both brushed it off as paranoia naturally. We then got in the car and saw him in the parking lot once again. No big deal. Deciding to play it safe, we decided to wait until he left. Turns out that he had a couple of guys with him. They pulled over on our left, leaning at us through the car window. Now I swear that we were in such a panic you could hear our hearts beat. Now, even as I'm typing this, I'm starting to panic. The car of the guys quickly sped over, parking next to us. My friend immediately floored the car, pulling it into reverse and pulling out of the parking lot. The guys followed. We honestly thought we were about to die, whether it being from going 80 miles per hour or getting chased by the creepy dudes. We quickly sped out of there, making a turn on some random road. Now the car of guys was behind us the whole time. They kept pace. They ended up waving and pulling into a church. That given us some time to get around them. Now at this point, we're going 80 and a 35, getting closer to my home. Neither of us wanted to lead the guys to our home, so we thought if we gone quick enough, they wouldn't realise where we were. And we decided that near my home, there's a little store where you can buy cigarettes, alcohol and candy. Basically a gas station without any gas. We got over there as quickly as possible. As we got in there, a guy approached us who worked there. All we had time to say was, "We're being followed." Luckily the guy understood exactly and started to go up to the front. We peeked around the corner and lo and behold, the group of guys were around the front. My friend and I proceeded to sneak through the back. Now in the back on the left side is a deli station and the right side is where the alcohol's at. My friends ducked into the deli station, I hid out on the right side. There was a female worker in the deli and my friend made a signal for her to be quiet. The female worker pretended that nothing was going wrong. A couple of minutes pass, we hear the front door open. I peek around the corner, it's one of the guys. I hide out in the back. My heart is racing, hoping that they do not come near me. Finally, a few more minutes pass, and the guy worker from behind the counter comes in and suddenly says that the guys are gone. He chewed them out. Oddly enough, they admitted that they were stalking us. When the worker pretended to be family, they quickly backed off, claiming that they're only getting alcohol. Luckily, this was the last that we've ever seen of them, but I'm still paranoid that they're going to return to this day.
I'm from a very small town, and Walmart was the closest thing to a mall that we had. It was the only store in town that sold groceries and clothes at the same time. When I was younger, I was a very shy kid, but my parents knew everyone, or so it seemed to me as a child, and even as an adult. One day, when I was maybe 8 or 9, my mother sent me to the electronics section of the store by myself to find some batteries and browse the video games until she wandered back to get me. A man approached me and said hello quite joyfully, which is not that unusual, being that my parents just knew everyone. I said hi back and gave him a hug. He then proceeded to go get the batteries that my mother wanted. I went back to the video games, and I was looking at them, when I realised that the man who I'd hugged earlier was watching me. He came up to me and tried to talk, but I stood around him and moved to another part of the electronics, still not thinking that he was weird, but not wanting to be caught in the typical adult conversation loop of, "How are your parents?" and "You've gotten so big." At this point, my mum shows up to electronics and passes by the man, showing no recognition. Suddenly, I got a sick feeling in my stomach. If my mummy didn't know this man, how did he know me? I watched him uneasily, and he watched me back until we left the store. And I never saw him again, but I was really wary of going off on my own in the store after that. So never leave your young kids alone, as anyone can approach them.
So a few weeks ago, I was in Walmart with my gram. We were walking around shopping and stuff, your normal Saturday morning errand run. While we were walking around, I began to notice an older man, late 30s or early mid 40s, kinda scruffy, clothes that he'd been wearing for a while. He's in the same aisle as my gram and I. I thought nothing of it since it's Walmart, it's not a very big one at that. At one point, my grandma asked me if I needed any new bras. I told her yeah, and we went to the ladies' underwear section of the store. My grandma went to look at the bras, and I went to go see if they had any match in my underwear, when I noticed a man again. I walked down to the sock aisle, and I didn't see him, so I slowly made my way back to where the thongs and stuff were. I was minding my own business when I heard somebody walk behind me. I figured it was my gram, so I partially turned to ask how many pairs I could get, but she wasn't behind me. It was the same guy from earlier. Whatever, I thought to myself. Maybe he has a wife or girlfriend. I went back to my own little world. I looked for another minute or so when I felt a presence behind me. I looked over to my left and I saw my grandma looking at nightgowns. I decided to stare straight ahead, since maybe somebody taller than me was just looking at the same underwear I was. I'm only 5 foot. I then felt somebody kind of press against me. I then heard breathing. It was weird heavy breathing. I tried to calm myself down. I turned on my heels to see the guy who'd been following me with his hands down his trousers. I screamed nanny and ran away. I told the Walmart security what happened, but they had no authority to do anything about it.
When I was 16 and still living in Canada, I worked at McDonald's that jointly owned a second McDonald's at our Walmart. Seeing as I worked in the main McDonald's, I also had work shifts at the McDonald's at the Walmart, which I didn't mind. Anyway, so when I started working at the Walmart McDonald's, nothing was out of the ordinary. I have no idea when it started because it was so long ago, but during lunch hours, this older guy, 40 or 50 years old, overweight, black bushy hair with a giant bald patch in the middle, and big bug-eyed eyes. He would purchase food, sit down at a table directly in front of the registers and stare at me. I know he was looking at me and not any other employee because he would never stop staring when he ate. This guy creeped me out majorly. This went on for weeks and months. It's been 8 years, so I can't remember all the details. It got to the point where I dreaded work at that Walmart McDonald's and was absolutely terrified of closing shifts and afraid of the possibility of seeing that guy outside of the McDonald's area. I tried telling a co-worker about it and she said it was probably nothing and that I was just being paranoid. So thinking whatever, it was probably just inside my head, I was on my break and bought some food to eat. The guy was sitting in the lobby eating, looking at me, but I didn't notice at first, until I took a bit of my burger and saw him staring at me viciously. I immediately picked up my tray and sat back in the storage area of the restaurant and started bawling my eyes out. My other co-workers came to see what was wrong and I refused to come back to work till that guy left. After that, I never saw him again. I don't know if I was overreacting or reading into it too much, but as a 16-year-old girl, I was terrified. This also dug deep, and I refused to ever work for a Walmart, even if I desperately needed a job. Anything could have happened that day. I was 16 and vulnerable, so who knows what his intentions were.
I was running on the trails at the Nathan Hale homestead, an 18th century farmhouse and property of a Revolutionary War hero. This was in Connecticut, which is only about a 10-minute drive away from my grandmother's lake house. I could not find a map of the trails anywhere online, and there didn't seem to be any signage at this place. Just a bunch of random mountain bike trails in the woods. I was only going to run 4 miles, so I estimated that I would run for about 30 minutes, using my watch to keep myself on track. So I ran around the trails for a while, and nothing seemed too out of the ordinary. It was around 9 on a Monday morning, and the only sounds were the distant hums of Route 31, birds chirping, and the occasional squirrel or deer that scampered off whenever I came near. The trail seemed to wind around a lot. If not for my better than average directional skills, I could have easily gotten lost. About 20 minutes in, I saw something strange about 50 meters off. A finely polished and light-colored wooden coffin. I was a little weirded out, to say the least, and waited until I got closer for a better look. I rounded a corner where several old tree stumps blocked my view, only to find that the coffin had disappeared. Where it should have been, there was just a clump of ferns. Odd. I turned around shortly thereafter and made my way back to my car. I was maybe half a mile out when I heard a very distinctive knocking on a nearby tree. I was a little spooked, but chalked it up to be a woodpecker or something. However, not 30 seconds later, there it was, on a completely different tree ahead of me. Exactly the same rhythm. Tock, tock, to tock, tock. I picked up the pace. The trail widened a little, and I could see way ahead to the entrance to the parking lot where my car was. There it was again, on a tree seemingly right next to me. I truly started freaking out, and started to book it back to the lot. I was nearing the opening, when time seemed to slow down. All of a sudden, it felt like the temperature dropped about 20 degrees. The birds stopped singing, and my simple Timex watch started to malfunction, making all sorts of beeping noises, and the numbers glitching on the screen. The beat sounded impossibly loud this time, like it were hacked into every surrounding tree with an axe. An overwhelming sense of dread washed over me as I anticipated hearing the rhythm again. I burst into the parking lot, and everything went back to normal. The temperature was back in the mid-70s, and birds were chirping away. I looked at my watch, only to discover that it had gone completely blank. I stood there and stared at it until it flashed 12 o'clock, Monday, 1:01, January 1st. My watch had completely reset itself. It had never done this before. I got into the car and started the engine. The clock on the radio read 12. That couldn't be right. It should have been around 9:30 or 9:45 at the latest. So I threw her in reverse and backed up to where I could clearly make out was the main road. However, as I was about to throw the car into drive as it sat there, I heard a sharp, rapping sound on the back window, like someone hitting it with their knuckles. It was the same beat. There was no one else in the parking lot when I finished my run. No cars, nothing. I didn't dare look back and hightailed it back to my grandmother's house. I have no idea what could have caused this series of events, and I still could not explain it to this day. When I was 13, I experienced the ghost of my grandmother. She died in her sleep whilst taking a nap on the living room couch. Afterwards, according to my father and grandfather, every now and again, they could hear her make the trip from the bedroom to the kitchen and open the refrigerator door. A trip she made many times when she was alive. At first, I thought my father and grandfather were making this up, having fun at my expense. A couple years after she passed away, my father and I went to spend the weekend with my grandfather. My father and I slept on the living room couch, as it opened into a double bed. The same couch my grandmother died on. My grandfather left the house to go to a next-door neighbor's house to play poker. My father and I went to bed in the living room, and my father went right to sleep. I, however, laid awake, reading a magazine. After a while, I heard the noise of the back bedroom door being pulled open. I heard the sound of shuffling feet, and I heard the creak in the floor directly in front of the bathroom doorway. I hear more shuffling feet. Then I hear the fridge door being pulled open, and I hear the sounds of glass bottles in the fridge door clinking against each other. Feeling thirsty, I decide to get out of bed and join my grandfather in the kitchen for a cold drink. I go into the kitchen, only to find I'm alone, by myself. I was puzzled. I could have sworn I heard my grandfather walk from the bedroom into the kitchen and open the fridge. It was at that moment that I remembered that my grandfather wasn't home. He was over at the neighbor's house, and he hadn't come back yet. Then I remembered my grandfather and father's ghost stories, and then I got scared. I raced from the kitchen into the living room and leaped over my sleeping father into my side of the bed. Then I went to sleep. I don't know how long I slept for before I woke, but I felt a feeling of paralyzing fear in my body. I was frozen. I was lying on my right side, and it took me a while to work up the courage to turn my head to the left. My head was covered by a blanket. There was a shadow being cast onto my blanket. The shadow was the outline of a head and the shoulders of a woman with a beehive hairdo. My grandmother used to always have a beehive hairdo, even years after it went out of style, up until she died. I heard heavy breathing coming from the shadow. I had to work up the courage to move one of my hands to remove the blanket off my face, and when I did, in an instant, The paralyzing fear I felt was gone. The shadow was gone. The sounds of heavy breathing was gone. My father was still sleeping. I pulled the blanket back over my head and went back to sleep, only to wake up on my right side, and the paralyzing fear was back. I forced my head to turn. The shadow was back. The heavy breathing was back. And again I summoned up all my courage to move my hand and take my blanket off my face, only to find that there is nothing there, and the feeling is again gone. I went through this same routine the entire night. I lost count of how many times it happened, maybe a dozen, maybe more, but it happened a lot. The next morning I told my father what happened to me throughout the entire night as he slept. The sound of the bedroom door opening, the shuffling of feet, the fridge door opening, nobody in the kitchen, being awakened with paralyzing fear, the shadow, the heavy breathing, and the repeat performances throughout the night. I kind of expected him to tell me that I was just seeing and hearing things, but instead, he just smiled and exclaimed, "That was Grandma." I did floor work with my aunt and uncle in college. We were cleaning an old church, and the caretaker took us on a small tour and showed us down in the boiler room, and honestly, that shit was creepy. We walked down this old cement staircase into the basement, no handrail, and the only light this way was halogen over the boilers, so you can barely see the steps you go down. Then you realise just how huge these boilers are, easily 3 times my height, and they were built there before there was welding, so they're riveted together. I mean, if you were to take me to this room blindfolded and ask me where I was, I'd have told you the serial killer's den. Anyway, we get cleaning, and honestly it felt like any other job initially. However, after we'd been there for a couple of hours, strange noises starting being made. I thought at first it was just the building, settling as the heating system cools down for the day. But then I realised that the vents were still pumping out warm air. I then moved from the main room and started working in the hallway. I realised a lot of the bangs I had been hearing were actually coming from the kitchen. The kitchen was locked shut. Sounded like something on wheels was moving there at one point. I also heard something metallic hit the ground there. We kept working, but also kept hearing noises. The caretaker checked in on us before we went to bed around midnight, and I had to ask, "Is the place haunted?" And he casually says, "Well, people tell me the place is haunted all the time, but I don't put much stock in it. If it is haunted, when I shut my door behind me, they just let me be. I hear an occasional noise, but again, I don't put much stock in it. Just building noises most of the time, I figure." For me, that settled it. Weird noises coming from the locked kitchen, weird noises from the floor above, and with only one person in the building besides my aunt, uncle and myself. Not to mention his room was lengthwise on the other side of the church. Moreover, he was probably around 70, so you could be pretty damn sure he wasn't behind any of the noises. So we kept cleaning and hearing the weird noises. I started working upstairs to get the entryway stripped, and that was when things really started getting strange. A general room layout was, the entrance doors were on the south side of the room, and the doors to the chapel were on the left. On the north side was a really long hallway that crossed the church lengthwise, with stairs going down to the basement on the east side of the hall. And finally, on the east side of the entrance room, there were stairs going up, and doors to the bathroom. I kept hearing one of the doors to the chapel close with a light bang. Now these are heavy doors, taller and thicker than regular doors, heavy wood, and they had one of those door stoppers that slows down and prevents them from banging. That's what made hearing those door bangs very weird, because if you simply opened the door and let it close on its own, it would almost make no audible noise. I kept hearing the noise for about 10 to 15 minutes until it finally got to me. I went to the nearest door and opened it. I poked my head in and noticed movement on the second floor. I saw smoke or mist or vapor or whatever moved almost as if it was sucked into the room by a draft. Needless to say, I was fairly creeped out by this point. Banging and noises from the locked kitchen, ghosts in the chapel, boiler rooms that feel like it's a serial killing room, old ass caretakers that would have probably turned out to be the villain in Scooby-Doo. So I went and told my aunt and uncle, who relayed their weird experience to me. Though they didn't see anything, just lots of noises, and my aunt said that she heard kids laughing at one point. My uncle was just waiting for the finish to dry downstairs, so my aunt and I went upstairs to vacuum the long hallway. And after that, we'd be done. We get the heavy ass equipment up the stairs, and my aunt and I crack some jokes about how long the hallway was, and how it was like something out of The Shining. That was when we both heard an insanely loud bang at the other end of the hallway. We just kind of stared at each other, a bit horrified, then ended up doing a very quick dry vacuum and heading back downstairs. By this point it was around 5 AM, almost 6. My aunt and I took off, and my uncle stayed until the floor finished had dried a couple of hours later. I don't really like going into churches in the first place, and now, even more so. I used to live way out in the middle of nowhere with my aunt and cousins for about 5 years. It can get pretty creepy at night. The town we were closest to only had a pre-K through, 12th grade school, post office, church, a tag agency and notary. We lived about 6 or 7 miles away, and we went to school there. Most of the homes are miles apart. We didn't even have bus stops. Each student was picked up from their house, and parents whose children rode the bus had to pay a fee for gas, because my bus rides lasted as long as 3 hours every day. That's how rural the area is, covered in woods and rivers, and there's a lot of wildlife. There had been a wildlife burning in a neighbouring county for the past couple of days, destroying acres of forest, forcing wildlife to flee. We had been extra cautious when driving, because deer were everywhere, and you couldn't drive long without seeing one. It wasn't uncommon to spot fellow motorists stranded after a deer incident. There was almost always blood-spattered trucks sitting at gas stations. My cousin and I were going home. We were using her truck to help a friend move a pool table, and we ended up staying and playing pool until a little before 4. We hadn't been drinking or anything, just hanging out, and we were driving down this old dirt road. Over the trees and in the distance, we could see smoke from the burning wildfire against the night sky. A big buck ran out in front of us, causing my cousin to hit the brakes. Then something much bigger ran out after it and grabbed the deer. It happened so fast my eyes were locked on the buck, and I didn't get a good look at whatever it was. We hit the arse end of it, and whatever it was went spinning. The truck crashed into a small ditch on the side of the road, sending dust everywhere. It wasn't serious and neither of us were hurt, but it knocked the battery cables loose. We pulled out our cell phones, but of course no signal, and we weren't surprised. Neither of us mentioned we were hit, and we got out in an attempt to open the hood, but we couldn't reach the front to unlock it, because the front of the truck was wedged against dirt and sitting angled downhill. There wasn't much we could do, so we walked up the road searching for a signal and using our phones as flashlights. Then we saw the deer laying beside the road. It had been gutted. There was a huge ragged hole on its belly, and its intestines were strung out for a few feet in the directions of the woods. This was a very large deer, and we immediately decided that we weren't going to be a part of this. We got back in the truck and waited for a passing car. I rationalized that we must have hit the deer or something, but she knew we didn't. We hit something else. We got lucky, and after about only 10 minutes, we see some headlights. It could take hours for another car to pass, but on these back roads, as soon as they get close, we flagged down the driver and told him what happened. He told us that he was heading out for an early morning hunting trip. He wasn't in a rush and offered to try and pull out our truck, and followed us, showing a big dent he had from when he hit a deer a few days earlier, which started a conversation about all our wildlife animal refugees. We told him about the deer and asked him if he knew which kind of animal could do that, and he decided to take a look. We walked him to where it was, but it wasn't in the same place, and it wasn't a whole deer anymore. It had been ripped to shreds. Most of its bones were intact, with strips of flesh still attached. It was a horrifying sight, mangled and bent in odd and unsettling ways. He said, "Holy shit, that's a 12-point buck." We asked if he thought a mountain lion could do that kind of damage in 10 minutes, and he just replied, "Maybe," very unconvincingly, and suggested giving us a ride home and coming back for the truck when it's light out. He gave us his number to help him pull the truck out later that day, but we had our uncles do it. We didn't want to bother him anymore. There was a bunch of black fur stuck to the grill but no blood. Our uncles brushed it off as an overreaction, but they never saw the deer. When I tell people this story, they're convinced it was a skinwalker. I responded to a 911 hang-up at our ranges around 9 p.m. They are out in the middle of nowhere, in the woods near an old wildlife refuge, so they are pretty isolated. There are no streetlights out there, and it's a few buildings with lots of open fields for sniper ranges and tons of woods. I pulled up to the gate, unlocked it, and drove in. I parked and walked up to the classroom, where the 911 hang-up phone was located. I should also note that this entire area has significance to the Civil War era and World War II, as it was a military installation. I would also like to note that the number for the 911 hang-up does not exist, but it occasionally trips our dispatch call center for unknown reasons. I've had my fair share of paranormal experiences, mostly when I was stationed in Japan, so I take the patrol shotgun out just to feel better about the entire stupid call in the darkness of the night, whilst responding to a 911 hang-up to a line that no longer exists. I unlock the door to the small wooden building. It's a trailer. As I open the door, the only light illuminating my path is a red exit sign directly above the door. I don't see any light switches, so I take a few steps in to locate them. As I do, there is a doorway directly to my right. By this time I can see in my peripheral vision a human-shaped shadow, with the red exit sign illuminating it. I turn quickly with the shotgun, as my heart starts racing. I can make out the face. I quickly start hitting the wall, and manage to find a light switch, which reveals a training dummy sitting in a chair. I take a breath and step back outside onto the deck and radio in for assistance, as I am no longer prepared to go on this ghost hunt alone. I go back inside and do a quick sweep of the building. It only has 5 small training rooms, and I also check the room where the phone line does not exist. There's no phone. Shocker. I then walk back outside and wait for my backup officer, who comes within 8 minutes of my call. Once he gets there, he already knows how dumb this is, because this call is creepy whenever we get it. We then proceed to check around the outside of the remaining 3 buildings in the area, and there's nothing. So we start heading back to our vehicles. As we approach our cars, an alarm starts going off on a small metal box attached to a metal unit sticking out of the ground. It flashes a red light affixed to the top of the box. We look at each other in dismay. Really? And start walking towards it. It's located between the training range and the range bay office. I radio in the alarm and ask if they can contact facilities, since neither of us knew this thing was even out here, and we had no idea how to shut it off. I then notice that there is a small keyhole on the metal box that is attached under the light. I grab my key ring and try to find a key that I think would fit. As soon as I made contact with the key to the metal, the alarm and flashing lights stopped. I looked at my friend and said, "We need to leave." He agreed, saying that this is getting stupid. I radioed in and told them that the alarm had stopped and we were back in service. This was the one and only time I had responded to a call of that nature. But others also had to do it. There are a few grave sites out there with markers from the 1800s, but nowhere near the range area I was at. It's a pretty historical area, and I wouldn't be surprised if there are a few spirits still roaming around the area. Last summer, I spent a good 2 months studying abroad in Italy, and the last few weeks travelling around Europe. It was my first time out of the States for a 21-year-old female going into my senior year of university. I spent my last weekend in Barcelona, Spain. Since I was only there for a short amount of time, I had elected to not pay for a phone nor phone card or anything like that. It wasn't a problem until now. I had gone out, like all young travellers, to a nightclub called Opium. If you're unfamiliar with Spanish nighttime hours, you start at around 2 AM and you'll go on till about maybe 7. I left at around 6 AM. I had travelled alone and stayed in an all-girls dorm in a very nice hostel, and I went with a big group of various European nationals and ended up alone at the very end. So I left in an officially marked taxi cab at the taxi stand outside of the club at 6 AM. I got in, and the driver is scrawny, definitely not of Spanish descent, but that was normal. He speaks English, so I give him the name of my hostel and just stare out the window. And you know what? 10 minutes later, I watch my hostel zoom by. I point this out, but the driver just ignores me and grins. I tell him that we just passed my hostel. He then says, "I don't speak English." "Sunrise." "What?" I ask. "Watch sunrise," he replies. At this point I was dumbfounded. I should have been on my game and jumped out of the cab or something. But I was a tired, alone, drunk, and phoneless suburban American girl. The fact I could have been a statistic took a few moments to dawn on me. Instead, I just stupidly asked him where he thought he was going, and try and gesture behind us towards the hostel. After about 10 minutes of becoming more and more agitated, he grabs my wrist and drags my hand to his crotch. I could feel his hard member through his pants. That was it. I yanked my hand away and started crying, begging him to stop, to let me out, to turn around. But the doors were locked, and he was speeding. At this point, it was way too fast for me to jump out without seriously hurting myself. He simply grabbed my hand again and tried to pull it towards his crotch. But when I yanked away, crying still, he reached over and grabbed my breast and tried to move his hand down to my crotch. At this point, we were maybe 20 minutes away from my hostel and just about exiting the city. I panicked when I saw all the buildings thinning and started shrieking my head off. I really can't tell you what made him do it. I don't know if it was my banshee screams, my tears, or me shoving him in his seat. I don't know. All I can say is that I think he is a disgusting coward, and something about that situation made him finally turn that cab around. Still hysterical, and still dumb for not bolting out of their car, he pulls up outside my hostel, looks at me, and says, €30, as if nothing happened. I wish I could tell you that I told him to go kill himself, but again, I was off my rocker. I numbly reached into my bag and threw him the crumpled notes and ran into my hostel. Some French girls I bonded with asked me what the hell I was doing, and I told them what happened. Apparently something similar happened to another girl just a few weeks ago. She was assaulted. I wish I had gone to the police, but my memories were so fuzzy of exactly which cab company it was and what he looked like, not to mention that I was about to fly back to the States the next day, that I just didn't bother. I don't think I'm going to go back to Europe again without a large group. So, creepy cab driver in Barcelona, let's not meet again. High school for me was extremely bad. It would have been fine if it were just slight name calling, or just being pushed around every so often, but it was a whole lot worse than that. Here is a little bit of background about my school. I live in an extremely popular tourist area with over 1 million tourists each year, with a local population of less than 10,000. My high school was considered outside the city limits and was considered a country school. The reason for this being that local business owners who didn't even live in the same state had to push back city limits to avoid the city taxes. And because it was considered a county high school, it lacked funding, with way too many students. Even in the last year, people still have to carry around books, not computers, to all their classes, and around 80% of the students came to my school from other schools because they had been kicked out and refused to take them back. A lot of them were convicted felons. This resulted in terrible students with teachers who are not paid enough to care, and oftentimes did things that they really were not supposed to do. My sophomore year of high school was the worst. I got beaten up every day, people stole my things, and I was pushed around by everyone. I remember in a particular class, 2 kids pulled out knives and threatened to cut my throat. I told the teacher, who replied, "I'll deal with it in a minute." I ended up having to run for my life and call the police. Other things that happened to me during the year included getting stabbed twice, being shot at once, ran over by a car, and pushed off a 2.5-story balcony, and people trying to beat me to death on 3 different occasions. They're all very serious, and I could go on, but I don't want to drag it out. I hope this gives you some perspective into just how awful this school was. with not a trace of caring about what happened to its pupils. As for the actual story, at the beginning of 11th grade, I met a guy called Aspin. Aspin was also picked on, just like me, along with 3 other kids nicknamed the Star Wars Kids. We were all picked on for no known reason. The 5 of us had sat together at lunchtimes for the past few months, and one day, Aspin says, "Wouldn't it be great if everyone here just died?" To which we all replied, yes, because we felt that a lot of these people deserved it for exactly how they had been treating us. We all began talking hypothetically and jokingly about what we would do to the school. But then Aspin took it further. He said he wanted to do a school shooting. We started off by making a list of people we wanted to keep alive, and then Aspin tells us that his father was an avid gun collector, and he had literally hundreds of guns at his disposal, all with ammunition. This started off as a joke, but escalated very quickly. The plan at first was to pull the fire alarm and wait till everybody went outside and then open fire. But we realised that there would be no way of saving the people on the list. After a long time planning, we discovered that we could quite easily lock all the doors from the outside within about 5 minutes, and this meant that it would keep the police out whilst we did what needed to be done, setting free the good kids, killing everyone and setting fire to the school. We had everything all set to go, but at the time there had been a lot of school shootings happening, and the school decided to add automatically locking doors to all the doors just in case there was a lockdown. After that, we needed to rethink our plan, which was taking so long the end of the year came before we could do anything. For me, 12th grade was the best half year of high school. It had been because by that time, so many people had realised how badly they'd been treating me. I feel like a lot of people started to grow up or stop being dicks, and lots of people apologised to me and expressed that they actually felt bad for what they did, and quite guilty. As this continued throughout the year, and people apologised for things that they had done, I started to feel better and forgive them. Aspin wanted to continue with the shooting, but me and a few of my friends really didn't want to anymore. So I wrote the principal a note telling him about our plan and telling him that Aspin was the ringleader, and a school shooting was avoided. Aspin got arrested, and me and the 3 other Star Wars kids got 3 weeks in ISS. We would have been expelled, but we were allowed to stay on the condition that we never tell anyone about our plan. I graduated high school, and I'm very glad that things ended the way they did, without violence.
Number 1. I worked as a security attendant in an apartment building. It's 24 stories, and is one of the oldest buildings in my city. One night, I'm sitting here when the phone rings about 3 AM. I answer. "Hello, this is D'Artagnan at the front desk. How can I help you?" The voice on the other end sounds female, but was totally garbled, and the only bit that I could make out was 23rd floor. I tried to tell the person that I couldn't understand them, and asked which apartment they were in, but again, they garbled a response saying 23rd floor. I said, "Since I can't understand you, I'll come and meet you in the hallway." So I go to the main elevators, and both of them, surprise surprise, are on the 23rd floor. Luckily for me, we have an old service elevator, and it's only on the 7th floor. I get in, and I hit the button for the 23rd floor, but it won't move, and the inner door will not close. So I go to unlock the reset panel, and boom, we start going up, with the door still open. I'm freaking out and the elevator is shaking because it goes pretty fast and it's quite old. As I'm going up, I just stay towards the back, and finally, I reach floor 23. I step out, door closes just fine, and I look around the hallway. There's no one here. I walk along slowly, trying to listen for anyone who might be awake that's called, but there's nothing. So now I head in the opposite direction and go towards where the regular elevators are. And when I get to them, they're just sitting there with their doors open. I was pretty freaked out, but I knew the elevators could just be on the fritz, so I get in and figure I'll just reset them when I get to the first floor. That's when I hear the sound of the back stairwell closing. So I quickly get out and go to the stairwell, but lo and behold, there's no one there. But the maintenance door to the machine room is ajar. And at that time, I was the only one in the building with a key. See, at the top of the building is a large machine room for housing all the really loud machinery that does stuff in the building and allows access to the roof. I don't really like going in there because it's creepy as hell, and no one ever goes in there. So at this point I'm pretty seriously freaked, but I muster up the courage and head in. I shout hello, and there's no response. The lights in the room flicker because they're crappy fluorescent lights, so I can't see that well either. But at the end of the room, I can make out the roof access door, and sure as shit, it's slightly open. So I slowly continue forwards, checking the space between each machine as I walk by, and there's no one there. So I open the door to the access roof, and I can't see anyone ahead of me on the roof. But there is a slight wraparound, and if there was a jumper or something I needed to be sure. So I stepped out and leave the door ajar like it was. Almost immediately though, the door is pulled shut. Now I might have written off as the wind or something, but this door is hard to shut, really hard. I immediately grab the handle and yank it open, slam it behind me and run straight for the maintenance door. It automatically locks when it's closed, so I slam it shut too and go back down to the 23rd floor hallway. I get into an elevator and the door is still open, and I go all the way down to the first floor. I go back to the main lobby, and as soon as I sit down, the phone rings. I pick it up and don't say a word. And sure as hell, garbled voice again audibly says, 23rd floor. I hung up the phone, turned the ringer off, and spent the rest of the evening just staring at the parking garage security monitor.
Dan works as a beach patrol officer for a small town on the east coast of Florida. Compared to most other law enforcement jobs, beach patrol is fairly mundane. To give you an idea, the highlight of your average work week during peak season is usually something like treating a swimmer with a jellyfish sting, breaking up a fight, or arresting some drunk idiot for disorderly intoxication. Of course, every now and then, you do see a little more action, and occasionally, you see something truly horrific. There was a teenager in a town about 10 miles north of where my friend works, who went missing one night whilst partying on the beach with some friends. The 17-year-old high school senior was a star athlete on the football team, and a strong swimmer by all accounts, so none of his friends were overly concerned when he waded into the choppy surf by himself. They sat around their bonfire, drinking beer and having a good time. They said they only took their eyes off him for a minute, and the next thing they knew, he was gone. Now, the first thing that probably comes to your mind of those listening is that this kid must have been taken down by a shark. Truth be told, shark attacks are far less common than you might think, and when they do happen, they're seldom fatal. The biggest threat to swimmers is actually rip currents. These powerful underwater currents can happen out of nowhere and are very quick, sweep even the strongest swimmer out to sea. Growing up in Florida, we're taught from an early age that if you're caught in one, you can escape by swimming parallel to the shore. The trouble is, a lot of people end up panicking and trying to swim against the current, exhausting themselves to the point that they eventually drown. It's easy to imagine how rationality can be abandoned for panic in such a scenario, especially for someone swimming alone at night who has been drinking. Either way, the authorities were notified of the disappearance. The police conducted a search of the area by helicopter, but turned up nothing. A missing persons report was filed, and everyone waited with bated breath as they feared for the worst. A few days later, Dan was at the beach patrol station when a Code 7, which is the dispatch code for a dead person, was called over the radio. He was one of the first responders to the scene when a couple of young teens claimed to have found a body drifting in the water. Through his binoculars, he could see what appeared to be a human head bobbing up and down at the waves, so he and two other officers went out in the patrol boat to investigate. As they got closer, they could see that it was in fact a dead body. The head was, for the most part, still intact, with the hot summer sun relentlessly beating down on it for the last 3 days. It was beginning to show signs of advanced decomposition. The eyes and lips looked to have been pecked away by seagulls, but the features were still mostly discernible, and it was definitely the missing high school student. From the neck down, however, was a completely different story. The rest of the body, which had been in the water the entire time, was now little more than a skeleton, with white flesh rags clinging to the bones. That had been, of course, been nibbled by all manner of aquatic life. Given the condition of the body, the only way to get it back to shore was to lasso it around the neck with a rope and tow it behind the boat. The most ghoulish thing about it, according to Dan, wasn't watching the fish following the body and biting at the stringy strands of rotting tissue as they pulled it with the boat, as was dragging it onto shore, only to discover that the ribcage and pelvis were infested with crabs, which had been enjoying a feast of their own. As for the two teens who reported it, they had been out surfing when one of them felt something brush up against him. He thought it was just a clump of seaweed, until he turned around and realized he was staring straight into the eyeless sockets of a human corpse. The incident was so traumatic that the boy apparently needed psychiatric counseling. I grew up in a Hindu cult. It was the truth, exemplified in our guru with his lifestyle of 6 cars, 2 mansions, 3 businesses, and international vacations in first class, together with annual celebrations of his family members' birthdays, all of which we were solicited to pay for and sponsored to the bottom of our pockets. We had to be in debt up to our eyeballs in order to prove our devotion. We were the elite, destined for self-realization, and were only allowed to have limited association with the rest of the world, even with our own non-believer families. Disobedience meant shunning and expulsion. We celebrated our birthdays only by decorating the guru's home and giving gifts to him and his family. I was homeschooled and attended university by long-distance learning, all so that I could stay in the group with our strict timetables of daily morning and evening prayers, communal meals, and morning and evening sermons by the guru. We had mandatory purification baths every morning and evening, and if we were to touch something polluted, like an unbathed person, old food, a menstruating woman, or dirty clothes, or even a thread from a cloth, we had to bathe and change clothes all over again. Some of the rules like that were really weird. We asked the guru's permission for every step in our lives. About our education, our career, our marriage. Vaccines were frowned upon, and if you got chickenpox or cancer or had an accident, it's because you had bad karma or ego. Girls had to wear their hair long, and both sexes had to wear old-fashioned traditional clothes that covered us from shoulder to ankle. We had to be vegetarian, and it was easy to control people, as we lived in rental accommodation owned by the guru's organization. Overseas disciples had visas sponsored by him, and he handled our utilities, phones, and internet. These were occasionally cut off or destroyed, once or twice by bulldozers, to discipline some disciples. In addition to the public shaming during the sermons and being yelled at, we also got physical correction, or purification as he called it. It was considered a blessing to be hit by him, as it was his guidance and his touch was sacred. Teens were strictly supervised. We got in trouble after a group of teens went out, chaperoned mind you, to a local temple's dance and music program, and more seriously when we went to the beach, since the cult provided everything we needed in life. Romance was of course forbidden, and marriages arranged by the guru between group members. The more the couple was opposed to each other, the more ideal it would be, as it put the guru first always in your marriage. Even those young people who vomited in disgust or swore they'd rather die were gently coerced into marriages, gays too, with the opposite sex. Several disciples were encouraged to and did break off their engagements or divorce their significant other, believing that it would be blocking the light and drive them insane. 2 girls eloped, and no one, including their families, attended the wedding. We were all told that natural disasters and man-made tragedies were due to our impurities. To offset these, we made huge donation to the guru's temple. He even had a badly hidden camera to film worshippers who thought they were alone. We were told that in fact nothing would be immoral if the guru, the living truth, asked it, whether financial, transactions, plagiarism, lying, nor stealing. Information was strictly controlled. Gradually movies were banned and our libraries disbanded. People were told to stop talking to one another. New babies were secluded at home. Disobedient disciples were sent out of town and shunned for several days as punishment. Around the point that we were told to cut off our mobile phones and give up our Wi-Fi and data and abandoned our pets, I read up on cults on the internet and decided to get out. I sold my jewelry to finance my plane ticket, driving lessons, and returned to university classes and a cult recovery workshop. In my recovery group, I discovered how similar our cults were. My friends and family in the cult have cut me off. My other family and ex-cult members have welcomed me back with open arms. I worked maintenance at a hotel in Montana about a decade ago. It was mostly normal shit. Guests were rarely an issue. The job was meh, but I was a broke student at the time in college. Weird shit happened to me when I got stuck with the late shift from 7 PM till about 2 AM. Honest to God, I still can't explain it. I was downstairs in the basement, setting up the big meeting room for some big event tomorrow. I have to explain the layout of this meeting room for people to understand. It was this huge room with 3 doors. The main door that opened into the hallway, the fire exit which locked from the inside, and the kitchen entrance. The kitchen had 2 entrances also, one into the meeting room and the other opening into the hallway. Anyway, that night I had spent all of the first part of my shift setting out this room by myself. 15 big tables, tablecloths, centerpieces, and God knows how many of those metal stackable chairs. It was about 5 hours of doing that, and I was actually pretty proud of my setup and vacuuming the hallway outside of the meeting room. I watched as the kitchen crew closed up for the night and waved them off. Lights out, and it's just me and my vacuum in front of this big-ass meeting room. I was finishing up my vacuuming when I hear the unmistakable sound of those metal chairs being stacked. Anyone who has ever stacked or unstacked those chairs knows that weird hollow metal clang. Especially me, after doing it for a few hours. I was a bit pissed. I had just spent 5 hours setting up this meeting room and figured that 1 or 2 of the kitchen staff went into the lounge before they clocked off. Mind you, I'm in front of the main door to the meeting room and the hall door for the kitchen. The only way in or out of this meeting room was past me, aside from the fire door, which you can't get in from the inside. Anyway, I hear the clanking, and I go running into the room with a, "Hey guys, knock it off," expecting to see a cook or 2, rearranging my precision chair setup. Instead, I am greeted with no one. The room is exactly as I'd left it. No chairs were moved. No one was in. I double-checked the kitchen, and no one was in there either. I shrugged it off as a trick of my ears and went back to vacuuming. As I finish vacuuming and turn it off, I hear the clanking again. Unmistakable, clear as day, coming from the big room. Again, I stomp into the room and proceed to do a thorough sweep, checking under tables, behind the podium, even in the storage closet in the back. There was no one. I'm getting a bit freaked out, so I just stand in the middle of the room, straining my ears to hear anything, thinking that maybe the noise is coming from the vents outside or something. But there's nothing, just me breathing. I shrug and head back out to pick up the vacuum. Winding the cord, I just happen back towards the main door of the meeting room. Before my head turns fully towards the door, I see someone walking right past the opening inside the room. I freak the hell out. I yelped and ran up the stairs to the main floor. I told management I was clocking out early and went home. Next day, I went in and got a minor scolding for not putting the vacuum away. I didn't believe in ghosts, and I have no explanation for what I saw. I heard the noises clearly, and I saw someone go past the doorway. I asked to be transferred to the day shift after that. Later that year, I quit the job to go back to school. One of my co-workers mentioned that one of the cleaning ladies was telling everyone that the basement was haunted. I don't know. It still gives me goosebumps whenever I think about that night.
This happened to me when I was 6 or 7 years old. I remember this very clearly to this day, and it still makes my spine shiver thinking about it. I had the large bedroom in my flat,
My mum had decorated the walls with pink and lavender paint and cute little metallic swirls. I had bunk beds, glittery curtains in my window, charms, and glittery things hanging from the ceiling. A young girl's dream. I'll try to explain a rough layout of my room. The door opens, and you will immediately see my purple bunk beds, with my head facing out the door. On the wall in front of you, behind my bunk beds, is a long window. To the left on the wall looking out to my garden. The next wall to my left of the bunk beds has a large fireplace, which I used to put all my trinkets on, and then the joining wall to my door was more of an alcove. Anyway, that is where I saw her. I remember getting into bed at night, and everything seemed normal at first. My room wasn't usually too dark, because the moonlight shone through my window and through my glittery curtains. After trying to sleep for what seemed like ages, I don't know why, but I started to look around my room, particularly in the alcove area. Something was in the dark corner. I couldn't focus my eyes properly for a while, but when I did, I noticed my girl's world head, one of those plastic weird lady heads that you can do makeup on and style her hair, stood out in the moonlight against the creepy dark corner. I remember going to lay back down on my bed, but I had an urge to look back, and when I did I was paralyzed with fear. At first I thought I might be imagining it, because I had been staring at the plastic lady head, but I swear I saw this dark woman-like outline stood right there next to the plastic head. It was like a dark grey black mist, but in the shape of a woman. I slowly looked at her, or it, with its massive bulging eyes, scanning down and saw that she had no feet. There was nothing there. No shadow, no feet, nothing. She or it was levitating about 10 inches off the ground, and it seemed like she was moving towards me. I was absolutely terrified, and will always remember this because of how cripplingly scary it was. I was in shock. I quickly spun around in bed and curled into the fetal position, with my quilt tightly wrapped around me. I made sure the quilt was tightly wrapped around my neck and head. And can I just add that there were no labels or anything that could have emulated what happened next. I was shaking and trying not to breathe loudly when I felt something standing behind me, leaning over me. I closed my eyes and gripped the quilt, and all of a sudden, I felt a tickle on the back of my neck. It's the feeling you get when someone puts their fingers on the back of your neck. It started off like that, and then became quickly more aggressive, tightening around the back of my neck, as if someone were trying to keep hold of me. I tried to scream, but no words came out. I was sweating and shaking, and my neck was getting worse. It was hurting. I tried screaming over and over, but all that came out were the little squeaks. It was as if I were gasping for air. I remember the moment when I was finally able to scream for my mum. I screamed at the top of my lungs, but it came out as a cracked, blood-curdling cry for help. But as soon as she ran in and flung the door open, a burst of light came through and the whole thing stopped. My mum grabbed me out of bed and carried me to the front room, cradling me as I sobbed hysterically. To this day, she still believes me in what I said, even though she's never had a personal paranormal experience. There was no way I lied about what I saw. From then on, I slept with my mum for a while, and we eventually moved out. I'm grateful that we haven't been back since.
This encounter is secondhand, but was told to me on multiple occasions by the person that experienced it. I'm a natural skeptic, so I can't say I 100% believe it, but his telling of it is pretty simple and didn't vary between retellings. I've known this guy for many years, and his advice and input on just about everything is well reasoned and always helpful, so I'll just take his word on it, even if with a grain of salt. So let's get down to business. My friend, we'll call him Marv, likes to go solitary camping on occasion, to be one with nature and the things that go along with that. He is also an avid gun collector and enthusiast. I don't remember exactly when he said this took place, but it was a few years back, and he decided to go camping on a whim. He packed his gear, a few guns, a hunting rifle, and a .45 caliber sidearm specifically, and headed out into the country, on a vast property owned by a friend of his. He had full permission in the works. This happened close to Kissachi National Forest in south central Louisiana. I won't be any more specific other than that. It's safe to say, it's miles and miles of forest and wilderness. He liked to hike in pretty deep, and camp at a specific spot he found a few trips prior. So, he made his way in and set up camp in his usual small clearing for the night. It's now late afternoon when he heard leaves crunching and twigs being stepped on. He assumed it was an animal at first, and got up from cooking something on the fire to try and get a look. He gazed in the direction of the noise, and saw a man approaching through the trees, several yards away. He has described his etiquette for dealing with other people in very remote places as always being cautious, as most often, most people he comes across are armed as well. He tries to stay as friendly as possible, but still keeps his guard up, looking for any ulterior motives, as you never can tell what some folks are up to out in the middle of nowhere. He'll make chit-chat with them, find out generally what they're up to if he can, and occasionally share a meal, etc. He's never really met anyone nefarious as of yet, other than this situation. So, one thing that sets off small alarm bells for him is that he knows he's the only one with permission to be on this property. And secondly, this guy's not dressed for the location at all. He said the guy was wearing a white t-shirt, short blue jogging shorts, and white socks and sneakers. Mind you, Marv is miles out in the middle of the woods, away from any paths, roadways, houses, or really anything. Nobody is going to casually stroll into his current location dressed like that, unless they are lost or confused. It was early fall, but not quite cool, very normal for Louisiana. So there's a ton of mosquitoes, ticks, and other insects aplenty. You're definitely not going to have most of your skin exposed in the deep woods if you can help it. I know this all too well from personal experience. So Marv assumes something might be up and calls out, "Hey there, do you need help or something?" Pretty loudly, definitely loud enough to be heard. The guy keeps walking forward, staring directly at him. Marv is starting to get unnerved, and as I said, I know this guy well, and he's cool as a cucumber in a tense situation. Getting more uneasy as the guy is closing the distance, he gets to his feet and loudly declares, "Hey man, can I help you with something or what?" The guy is 15 to 20 feet away from Marv now, is standing at the edge of the clearing in the forest. The guy, looking Marv dead in the eyes, finally speaks and says clearly, "Help me." Marv said that he was already starting to actually get worried at this point, and because he said the way the guy said this was as if something that didn't know exactly how to talk was saying help me, or at least that's what he first thought. It just didn't sound right. The guy, still not moving, says, "Help me." Again, slightly more emphatic, but really just louder. Marv said This is when he picked up on what was truly wrong about this. He said the inflection of the voice was more female and actually sounded like a recording being played back, and the guy's lip and mouth movements weren't matching up with the phrase. It was like he was just opening his mouth, emitting the phrase and closing it again. Marv asked, "What do you need help with?" Not daring to move. The guy, still standing motionless and still looking directly at him, repeated the phrase another 3 times. Marv, now totally unsure what the hell is going on, interrupts the guy. "Alright, you need to fucking go now, unless you actually need my help. Do you need my help or not?" He continued loud and firm. The guy didn't miss a beat and started up with the help me's again, and took another step in Marv's direction. Marv told me that he did the only thing that made sense in the moment, and drew his .45, pointing it at the guy and telling him, "You need to fucking go. I don't care what you want." The guy starts to get more animated and agitated, starting to say the phrase louder now, over and over, but not stepping closer or backing away. Marv did what he thought was right given his current predicament, assuming that he was dealing with an unstable or potentially dangerous individual, and discharged a round into the ground in front of the guy. This is where it gets fully batshit crazy, as the guy stops uttering the phrase, goes silent, and still staring at Marv, full-on backflips like gymnasts do, back into the woods and immediately out of sight. Now, I know what you're thinking because I had and still have the same reaction. That sounds like bullshit, but Marv gave no indication of falsehood and told me this multiple times, each time in dead serious demeanor. Marv said that the guy backflipped away effortlessly as if pulled back by an unseen tension coil. He described it as completely humanly unnatural and totally out of place. Marv said he stood there, focused on the forest where the guy had just flipped into, and saw and heard no further movement. It was like the guy had never even been there. He stayed like this as the sun began to set, and the normal night noises crept in. As I mentioned before, Marv is a pretty unshakable fellow, and actually stayed in the area for the night and next night before returning with no further incident. And when he had told me and some other friends about this, of course, we had asked many questions. We asked him to elaborate on the guy's speech sounds. He said the more he thought about it after the incident, the more sure he was that it was definitely a female's voice coming from the guy. It was like he, or it, had heard someone say this and mimicked it like a parrot or other talking bird would, almost like a lure. He doesn't know what it wanted. He, or it didn't give any indication to follow or say anything else. Marv has been back to the property since with no other strange occurrences. The only other minute detail that I can think of is he did remember hearing, during the early morning of the first night, what sounded like a gunshot off in the distance, and it did sound eerily similar to his .45. He thought that he may have heard it again on the hike back out. There are people that hunt in the area, of course, and it could have just been that, but he couldn't be sure. Since this incident, he did some online research of the whole Kissichi area and found many legends, stories, and supposed encounters dealing with skinwalkers and other unnerving bits of Native American folklore, not to mention mimics and other similar creatures. A lot of his encounter lines up with these tales, but there's nothing tangible to prove it. But even as a skeptic, it does make me wonder about strange things in the remote and untouched areas of our world that can't be explained. This happened when I was in college. I lived in Isla Vista, the student community at UCSB, notorious for being a party school. It fully lived up to its reputation. I like to party, but holy shit, these people were off the wall. As such, there were a lot of people who put themselves in dangerous situations, drinking to excess, not being careful, not locking doors, etc. It had a very isolated and insular vibe, and anyone who was hanging around who wasn't college-aged immediately looked out of place and strange. One night, after having a few drinks, I came home to my small house where I lived with 2 other girls, probably around 2:30 a.m. We were all serious students. I was probably the least serious actually, and when we partied, it was not your typical UCSB mega rager, more like a small get-together with friends. We would often have a few people spend the night, asleep on our furniture or in our beds as the case may be. That night, my roommates had a few people over who I didn't know, and I saw when I returned home that one of them had opted to sleep on the couch. From the shadow that I saw there, I didn't turn on the light so I wouldn't wake anyone up. But as I was passing the couch to enter my bedroom, I noticed that the figure was lying very stiff. He just had this weird energy to him. He was lying down, but it was like he was putting all of his energy into lying as still and rigid as possible. I paused, and the guy quickly jerked his head to face me, without moving his limbs, so quickly that it startled me. I could see his wide open eyes glinting in the dark. Figuring that I'd startled him, or that he was drunk, or maybe on some kind of stimulant, not able to sleep, I just hurried past into my bedroom and locked the door. The dude made me nervous, and I wasn't taking any chances. I soon fell asleep. At 4:30 a.m., I woke up. There was a strange sound at the door, almost like somebody was drumming their fingers against the wood, very quietly. I lay still and listened. There were more quiet sounds, like someone scratching the door with their fingers, which got louder and louder until it was clear that he was using both hands and scratching as fast and as hard as possible. It created an extremely loud and intimidating sound that filled me with fear. I got my cell phone and texted my roommate because I was afraid to make a sound. "Your friend is freaking me out. Is he coked up? Can you talk to him? He's banging and scratching on my door." She didn't text me back, probably because she was asleep. I texted my other roommate to the same effect, covering all my bases. Keep in mind that the scratching has been going on at this point for a couple of minutes. I have no idea how he could have sustained it. Scratching a wooden door with your fingernails can't feel good. He also grabbed at the knob and jiggled it super forcefully. Because neither of them answered, I decided to call and really wake them up, though I was scared to make a sound. I know it sounds stupid, but there was something seriously horrifying about being teased like this through the door. I knew that he was trying to terrify me. I felt like a little kid, but I could tell this guy was fucked up on something, and maybe the police needed to be called, and I wanted to loop my roommates in since it was one of their friends. The scratching stopped abruptly, and I called my roommate, who answered sleepily. "Yo, your friend is messed up. Can you please deal with it? Do we need to call the cops? He's seriously scaring me. He was scratching at my bedroom door. Really fucking weird." She didn't say anything for several seconds, and when she did speak, her voice had no sleepiness in it at all. "What friend?" she said. "That fucking guy that was sleeping on the couch," I said. She was quiet again. "We didn't have any guys over," she said. "Call the police." My adrenaline surged, and I told her to please lock the bedroom door as quickly as possible. I realized that I hadn't heard scratching in a while, and I had no clue where the dude had gone. Suddenly, I heard a loud banging in the other end of the house, where my roommates, Lauren and Monica, shared a bedroom. The bangs were followed by the sound of them screaming in fear. I quickly dialed the police, as this maniac proceeded to bang against the luckily locked bedroom door of my two roommates as they screamed. The heaviness of the blows left no doubt that he was actually trying to break the door down. I told the 911 operator the situation, and she dispatched 2 squad cars. The police in Isla Vista are generally used to peeling drunks off the sidewalk and breaking up brawling frat bros. This was really serious and strange, and I think the dispatcher got the sense from my tone how terrified I was, and she stayed on the phone with me. At one point, the banging stopped, and everything was quiet for a while. I talked with the dispatcher and suddenly looked down to see that this guy had slipped his fingers through the 1-inch gap between the door and the floor and was just kind of wiggling them around, making this weird growling sound. I screamed and backed away, which is my biggest regret about the situation, since when I look back, it would have been so awesome to just stomp the shit out of those fingers and hear the guy howl in pain. And when the cops rolled up, I heard running and the sound of our sliding glass door opening and closing. And then he was gone. The cops never caught him. He had broken in through our side door by jimmying the lock somehow. My door was covered in what turned out to be huge gashes he'd made using a pair of scissors, which he discarded on the ground before he left. What terrifies me most about this was that I walked right past him. I looked him right in the face. I realize now that he was not trying to sleep or on drugs, but was lying so stiff like that because he was hiding. He probably heard me open the door and freaked out because he hadn't realized there was another girl living there and tried to blend into the couch in the darkness. Around March of 2014, I started talking to this girl on Tinder. She seemed cool and fun, and after about a week of talking, she suggested we meet in person. She invited me to this coffee shop, and I accepted. However, the day of, she started messaging me, saying she had to tell me something. Her pictures on Tinder weren't actually of her, and yes, she was a guy. He claimed he really liked talking to me though, and begged me to still meet up with him. Naturally, I declined. I blocked his profile and continued on my life. About a week later, I started talking to another girl. Once again, she seemed cool and fun and we hit it off. She asked me if I spoke to people on Tinder frequently, and, rather stupidly, I told her about my previous encounter with the man lady. Weeks later, I would realize that this new girl was the same girl as the week before. She asked me if I wanted to meet up, and I said sure, as long as it was in a public place. We decided on a cafe, and the next day, I sat at a table waiting. 5, 10, 15 minutes had passed, and she was nowhere to be found. I then peered out the window and saw, from across the street, a man staring at me intently. I looked away, waited a few seconds and looked back. He was still standing there staring. At that point, I left the cafe, got on my bike, I always bike everywhere, and booked it home. I was definitely a little freaked out, but tried to pull myself together, and reasoned that no one could have followed me. I then deleted my Tinder profile, and things were normal for a few weeks. About 3 weeks later, I started getting phone calls. The numbers all showed up as unknown. I picked up the first few times to some guy breathing heavily into the phone. I was already a little freaked out. I stopped picking up any call unless it displayed the caller's name. I then started receiving texts. At first, they were pretty harmless. Calls for attention and begging me to meet in person. It then changed to very sexual texts, until eventually, the messages became threatening, and whoever was messaging me started throwing out my family and friends' names and their whereabouts, saying that he or she would get them involved unless I answered. And because they were texting me, I could see a displayed number, but when I called phone providers, they told me the number couldn't be traced, and that it was probably a track phone. Great. I waited about 2 weeks, not responding to the texts, thinking that I shouldn't feed the troll. But eventually, it became too much. I started getting upwards of 50 texts and phone calls a day. I would wake up to 10 or 20 texts every morning. I then decided to change my number altogether. The texting and calls stopped for a while, but sure enough, it started happening again. I called my phone provider asking if they ever gave out numbers at a user's request, and they said that their policy stated that they wouldn't and couldn't unless valid identification was provided. Then, one day, I tried logging into my Facebook, but I was denied. Within a day, my friends started contacting me, asking what the hell I was doing, saying that they were getting terrible messages from my account. In particular, one of my girlfriends was receiving messages about her mom, who died years ago. I apologized profusely and told people what was going on. I contacted Facebook and explained the situation, and they helped me access my account again, at which point I deactivated it for a while. Enough was enough. I decided to contact the FBI, explaining what had been going on for over a month now. They documented everything, but since I or any of my relatives or friends were in no immediate danger, they probably wouldn't be able to do anything. At that point, I felt stuck. I thought about hiring a private investigator or a hacker. I decided against it, however, and just hoped it would fade out if I never answered. I left my Facebook deactivated and ignored any texts or phone calls. I never had any trouble at home, but some of my closest friends received the occasional text as well, which weirded us all out. I hated that they got dragged into it. One day, I came home and things felt very eerie. The doors unlocked, windows open, and no one was there. I did a check of the place and found nothing else weird, so I locked everything up and just waited for my roommates to get home. It's been almost 7 months now. The calls and texts have more or less stopped. I'll get an occasional text, but at most, one every 2 weeks. At the peak of it, I was receiving almost 100 texts a day. It definitely affected my social and personal life. I became much more wary of the people around me and my surroundings. I just felt like I couldn't really focus on anything until it stopped. Work was difficult, though I tried to maintain my composure as best I could. Everything was just weird. Life was weird. I've since stopped using all forms of dating apps and websites. Things are getting back to normal at this point. I just want to put it all behind me. I'm moving at the end of this year, so it'll be nice to have a fresh start in a new place. I'm not going to sit here and say all dating apps are dangerous and no one should use them, but definitely cover your bases. Ask more questions before meeting someone. FaceTime them first, Skype, anything. I was naive about it, and I regret it. Be safe, stick close to your friends, and try meeting people in more traditional ways. Weird Tinder stalker? Let's not meet.